Hello and welcome. This is Corey Angelot. Welcome to the End of Slavery Summit. I'm here with a very special guest, somebody who is going to talk about a subject that a lot of people may have experience with and a lot of other people may not have experience with. Some people may say this is a really powerful thing. Other people may say, well, wait, this is something I don't know if I want to get into. But we're going to talk all about it and see its role and time and place in our use for trying to get to freedom. This is a process, and sometimes we might need some assistance to getting there, whether it's individually or collectively. I am joined here by Aaron Nebbia, right? Did I say your name correctly?
That's right. Yep.
All right. And could you give an introduction to the audience about yourself and why is it that we're going to talk about psychedelics and why you think it's important?
Okay. Yeah. So my name is Aaron, and so yeah, I chose the topic because there's a lot of important topics that have to be talked about for where we're at in our world and how to get out of the situation we're in. But um, to me, the real root problem of all the problems we see in the world is the state of consciousness that human beings are in, because the internal worlds is where the external world comes from. The collective state of mind that people are in, that's what results in the world we see around us, because behavior comes from level of consciousness. And I don't think it's too hard to look around and see that the average people out there are not in the highest state of consciousness. um, there's different grades of it. There's people who are obviously doing a lot of evil and oppressing our world a lot, and then there's also the vast majority of people that are in kind of a state of apathy, or just not even really seeing the fact that they're enslaved in many ways and brainwashed in many ways, and how limited the human mind has become through the conditioning in society, the media, school, and so-called entertainment and all of that. And I think it's all about coming back to basics, like asking the most basic questions, like who are we? What is our purpose here? What does it mean to be a human? What is consciousness itself? What is the creator, God, however you see that? I think these most fundamental questions are the most important things I think that's the most important starting place. And you're not going to get that through education. Religion will give you a very watered down version. So I think a lot of the older religions and spiritual traditions were much closer to the truth, but obviously they've become corrupted over time and used more for control purposes than anything else. So these plant compounds that have been on the planet with us for millions of years, that cultures all over the world have been using, they've been used in shamanism and lots of different spiritual traditions. And there's even evidence that a lot of the earliest religious texts probably came from the use of entheogens, also known as psychedelics. We've lost touch with that over time, of course, but these compounds are something that are very stigmatized in our modern day culture. And I think that's because they're a threat to the control system we're under, because the control system depends on us not asking the important questions and not knowing our true nature.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it has to do with that saying that we're not human beings having a spiritual experience, we're spiritual beings having a human experience. I think if we were aware of our true divine nature, our true spiritual nature, we would never tolerate a lot of the control and manipulation that we're under. And also, being in an expanded state of consciousness allows you to see where you've been brainwashed and manipulated when you might not have seen it before. You've kind of just been going along with the program, as they say. And these compounds are something that encourages you to step outside like your preconditioned ways of thinking and beliefs that you've been taught. All of a sudden, you might start asking, like, well, are these things they told us in school really true? Did history really happen the way they told us? Like, maybe I should look into it for myself. Is the media really telling the truth? I used to just think of the news as the news, like whatever's going on in the world, they're telling it. The question of, are they lying to us or who's controlling it, that had never ever even entered my mind until the first time that I tried psychedelics in college, and then all of a sudden I was asking those kinds of questions, like who's controlling these narratives and for what reason.
Well,
What about our food? Is our food really fit for human consumption? And these are a lot of different topics, but um, I mean, you kind of start asking about all these most basic things. I also kind of see the red pill in the Matrix movie as being very similar to what psychedelics are in concept.
yeah. So there's a lot of people that I know, not just yourself, who've told me, said, hey, these psychedelics and these different substances I've tried have actually made me more aware of my environment and more aware of what has gone on. And I've seen it, face to face, or they find a deeper part of themselves, and it teaches them lessons that they don't normally see. So you mentioned, the important role entheogens play in liberating the mind and cultivating both internal and external freedom. So, as a complete like novice to this, myself and maybe many others who are watching, I mean, are these psychedelic compounds found all over nature, or where are they found in nature? How are they manifested into our
They
reality?
they are pretty much found everywhere in nature. Different continents have different ones that are more common in each one. That's why, like, if you look at the different traditions around the world, you'll see very psychedelic looking artwork. Like the
Hmm.
Mayans were big on psilocybin mushrooms, and also salvia divinorum was another big one for them. Or if you look at the Siberian shamans, they were very into the Amanita muscaria. That's actually where the Santa Claus legend comes from, and that's why he's red and white like that mushroom. That's kind of a whole other story to get into.
Uh,
The African tribes, a lot of them used iboga. In the jungles of South America, there's ayahuasca, and mushrooms are psilocybin mushrooms are common pretty much all over the world. You can find them just about everywhere. But
hmm,
um, I mean, I've always thought it's pretty clear when you look at nature that there's whatever you believe God or creator is, there's some kind of order behind everything and consciousness behind everything. Because when you look at like how everything keeps each other in balance, everything has a purpose. Um, the wolf population keeps the deer population in check, and then they keep the plant population in check, so nothing gets out of. It seems like humans are the ones that kind of imbalance everything.
yeah,
Uh, so I think the fact that these plants are here, um, I think that's another sign that there is some force of good out there that's trying to aid our evolution. You could just see it as a manifestation of nature itself trying to prod us along and get us to evolve. Um, Terence McKenna, I think, talks about one theory that the first psychedelic mushroom spores might have come here on a comet a long time. I haven't looked too deeply into that theory, but
hmm,
and then the other big one is DMT. That's actually kind of the most central one because every single life form on the planet, maybe even in the whole rest of the universe too, but at least on this planet, uh, every form of life, like every human being and every blade of grass, everything has this compound in it. So,
yeah,
and DMT is the most potent psychedelic that exists. So the fact that a psychedelic chemical it seems to be one of the most central common components of all life, to me that says something. And from what I know about DMT, it's and psychedelics in general, but especially DMT, since our own body creates it, it seems like it has a lot to do with our perception itself, and even opening up our perception to what you might call higher dimensions beyond just the five sense world that we perceive around us all the time. The whole idea that like what we see, feel, and smell and hear, that's all there is. Um, a lot of people, I think, know deep down inside that there's something more than what we see, but they also know scientists acknowledge that we only use a small portion of our brains at a time. And one of the
hmm,
slides I actually um, put up for this presentation is the one showing the image of a brain scan.
Yeah.
And so there are ways for the whole brain to be used at once, not just one small part of it at a time. So um, I think it makes sense maybe that if certain areas of the brain are connected that aren't normally connected, then in those moments, maybe we can perceive more than we normally would. And instead of thinking of them as hallucinogens, because that's what society thinks of them as, is, you take these things and you hallucinate, you see things that aren't there. I see it more as something that removes filters, and the things that you see and perceive and think of that you wouldn't normally, they're just layers of reality that normally we're closed off to, and now we're becoming opened up to them through these compounds.
I
So
see.
that's the role I think they play. And as far as freedom, since if they have the ability to help free your perception and create internal freedom, then like I was saying, your consciousness, well, the collective consciousness of everyone determines the world around us. So the more people who find internal freedom, the more external freedom in the world will have too.
Right. Right. Yeah, it is a process of the self, and I've gone into that with a lot of other speakers. So, and before we kind of get into this slide, because I really like this, the fact that you provided this study, it's very interesting. Before we get into that, I'm curious. So, there's a lot of different substances out there, and all sorts of things. Some psychedelics, some not, right, or whatever. Um, and it seems to me like some things can be good, but they could be used for bad, right? Or people can take
Yeah.
what is good and ultimately twist it or use it for bad purposes. So, can psychedelics or these things that we talk about here, can they be dangerous? Are they for everybody?
That's always an important thing to look at with anything. Any powerful tool can be a double-edged sword.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, it's like that with firearms. You can use one to save your life or your family's life, or you can use it to go murder a bunch of innocent people.
Yeah.
So, I mean, psychedelics, they can have bad use. Usually, it's not deliberate bad use. It would be somebody jumping into it who doesn't have the right understanding of what they really are and what they're for. If you see something like LSD or mushrooms or ayahuasca as a party drug, and you think, oh, I'm going to take this and go have a blast at a party, you're probably not going to have the greatest time. And you could even have a really terrible experience. The people who freak out or supposedly like do crazy, dangerous stuff on them, hurt themselves and others, I think those are mostly people who they're either not in a good place mentally to do it in the first place. But I think it usually has to do with what they call set and setting. That's a common term in the world of psychedelic use. Actually, it means mindset and setting. Setting as in your external and so basically your internal and external environment.
Hmm.
The state of mind you're in when you do it, where you are, who you're around, and the dosage you take, of course, and most importantly, understanding what these things are really for. They're for spiritual growth, and they might uncover a lot of inner demons and shadows that might be very uncomfortable to look at. If you know that you're going into it for that reason, then it can be great for healing. But if you're not expecting that and it just comes at you out of nowhere and you don't realize that it's a spiritual tool and that everything you're experiencing is coming from you, um, it can be really terrifying and out of control then. And that's the other thing too, is if a experience with it is really intense and you try to control it, that's the biggest mistake. The whole idea is to surrender to it, whatever's going on. And if you try to fight the experience, you're really just fighting what your own subconscious is trying to present to you, and that's going to make the experience worse. So I would say, yeah, they can definitely be used incorrectly. The most important thing to do is research. I would say read as many people's experiences with them as possible. Maybe on a website like arrowwood.com, or just go to YouTube and type in like mushroom trip report, DMT trip report, things like that. If you listen to enough of them, I would listen to the ones that say good trips and bad trips. That way you understand the full range of what they can do and know better how to prepare yourself for it ahead of time.
Right, and you have resources for everybody, so they can kind of look more into this that we'll get into
Yeah.
toward the end here. That'll be, of course, really helpful for a lot of people. So yeah, thank you for answering the question. I think it is it is a situation like anything else. If it's powerful, something that can help the world, that it's got to be used responsibly. And so yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, that makes sense. So let's look at this slide that you provide about the study. It says the first ever study on LSD using brain imaging technology. Now, before we continue here, what is LSD? Could you kind of fill us in
Um,
on that?
it stands for lysergic acid diethylamide. It's actually LSA is the original chemical found in nature. It's actually found in rye ergot, a fungus that grows on rye. But if you use it in that form, um, just take ergo straight, it's also poisonous. But that is how people first discovered it, and the scientist that actually first came up or first discovered LSD discovered it by accident. His name was Albert Hoffman. He was actually he never even really knew about psychedelics or anything, and that's not what he was looking for. He was looking for a cure for cluster headaches, and he was seeing if some kind of derivative of the ergo fungus could do that. And this he tried a bunch of different experiments. This one chemical he came up with that he thought was useless happened to be LSD, and he just kind of set it on a shelf and didn't think much of it. Thought it was really just a failed experiment, and then he actually says in his own writings that one day, like some voice inside him kind of nudged him to go revisit that chemical. He ended up getting some on his skin, and he didn't expect any mind altering effects to happen, but that was the world's first true LSD trip. That day was April 19th. I forget what year it was, but April 19th is known as Bicycle Day now because after he got some of it on his skin, he rode his bike ride home. He talks about like how the world around him completely transforms on his bike ride, and he had no idea what it was from, but he eventually figured out it was from that chemical, and then from there, like his life was changed. He became a very spiritual person, and he ended up using small doses of it pretty much every day as an antidepressant, not like full blown high doses that would produce a psychedelic effect, but
Hmm.
what you'd call a microdose. So anyway, that's where LSD came from originally, and I mean, if you do believe in some sort of God or creator or angels or spirit guides or some kind of you know unseen force that guides us along, I would tend to think that the discovery of this wasn't really an accident. It was probably some kind of divine intervention or maybe benevolent ET
Hmm.
intervention or something that guided him to discover this chemical when he didn't even consciously know that's what he was doing. But I think it was because the world really needed that breakthrough at the time.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Wow. Thanks for sharing that. Do you want to present this slide going over the study and kind of break it down if you want?
Sure. So this it wasn't the first ever study on LSD at all, but it was the first one using brain imaging technology, since that's a pretty modern technology. It was in 2016 um, at the Beckley Imperial Research Program. Okay, so the first ever study on LSD using brain imaging technology was conducted in 2016 at Oxford by scientists Robin Carhart Harris and David Nutt. So in this experiment, 20 volunteers were given either 75 micrograms of LSD or a placebo. And that's not even that high of a dose, by the way, but it's definitely enough to give noticeable effects.
Hmm.
And then they underwent brain scans during this. So the 20 people, each of them either had a placebo or the real thing. And the image you see on the left are the people who had the placebo, and then the image on the right, that's the brain scan of someone while they were under the effects of LSD. And you can see that a lot more areas of the brain are communicating and are active at one time than what you would normally see. Normally, you'd see like one area light up, then another, then another. Um, you don't really see the whole brain lit up all at once like that, except in this situation. Or the other time you see this is when they've done brain scans of like very experienced meditators, like Buddhist monks or people who have been meditating for decades. And because you can reach these states naturally, that's also important to know. A lot of people say like, oh, you don't need these chemicals because you can get there naturally, but I think both things are important because these chemicals can show you what's possible and inspire you to go on that journey of getting there yourself. But let me see here. So in the study, it says the way that this worked is that LSD decreases communication between the brain regions that make up the default mode network, a collection of hub centers that work together to control and repress consciousness. Like the conductor in an orchestra, the DMN polices the amount of sensory information that enters our sphere of awareness and has been described as the neural correlate of the ego. So that's like a filter, basically. Our minds, whether our minds were designed naturally that way, or maybe they were conditioned over time that way. There's a lot of theories about that, but one way or the other, in our modern day, our minds filter out most of the information coming in all the time. So this sort of it lifts that filter, and I would say the higher dose you take, the more filters are removed. Kind of like opening the nozzle on a hose wider and wider, or turning up voltage on an electrical line.
Right.
The DMN, which is the part of the brain that filters consciousness, disintegrates under LSD, allowing for a magnificent increase in communication between brain networks that are normally highly segregated. So that's probably where the consciousness expanding effects come from, because if parts of the brain are communicating that wouldn't normally, then you might start connecting dots in your life that you wouldn't normally connect, or maybe some problem that you've been trying to figure out for months or years, all of a sudden it just clicks when you're not even trying to figure it out. Or something about the way the world works, like why is this way, or why is that, like suddenly it'll make sense. That can be an experience a lot of people have.
Right.
So this produces a more integrated pattern of connectivity throughout the entire brain, which may be associated with more fluid modes of cognition. This could have major implications for LSD-assisted psychotherapy, as it indicates how the drug allows patients to break free from the rigid modes of cognition and thought that underlie hard-to-treat conditions such as depression and addiction. So, yeah, basically, like it's saying here, it has the ability to help a person break free of, their normal, familiar, kind of hardwired thought patterns, beliefs, things like that, and whether someone has an addiction or an unhealthy belief system, or they're just really brainwashed from education or media or something, and this has the ability to break through all of that and get you to question what you've believed, or even see yourself in a new way. As far as breaking addiction, like that's a whole other topic that could probably be an hour interview in itself, but LSD was actually part of the original AA type of program when it first came out, and the success rates with breaking people's alcoholism and other types of addictions were much higher when they were using this component. And a lot of people today still go for ayahuasca ceremonies in the jungle, or iboga, things like that, as like a last resort when they've tried everything else to overcome an addiction. And it actually has the highest percentage rate of success for any kind of addiction treatment out there that we know of.
So you say it's an addiction treatment. I mean, would this cause an addiction itself, or no?
It doesn't tend to, because it's such an intense experience. It's not the type of thing somebody would probably be in a rush to do over and over again. I mean, doing it every day wouldn't be practical. And there's also a thing with psychedelics where tolerance builds up pretty much overnight. So if you take, say, 75 micrograms one day, in order to get the same exact
your audio
the
is
next day you'll have to take 20. twice that
One
much.
second. One second. Your
Wait, is
audio
it
is a little weird right now.
Oh,
Okay, now it's better. Go
how is
ahead.
it now?
Repeat what you just said. The dosage.
Okay. Yeah, so psychedelics, whether it's mushrooms, LSD, most of them have a tolerance thing where like your tolerance will literally double overnight. So you might be able to do it 2 days in a row, maybe three, but you'll have to increase the dosage each time you do it. If you get to like day 4 of trying to do it daily, like it'll just stop working pretty much at that point. So it's pretty much impossible for most people to get addicted to these things. If anyone did find themselves addicted, it would be a psychological addiction, not a physical addiction, because um, I mean, you can get psychologically addicted to any kind of experience that you enjoy, whether it's playing video games or anything, food. So I guess in theory, somebody could find themselves psychologically addicted to this,
Yeah.
um, but it's not common. It's I've seen people say things like, "Oh, so if you go and take ayahuasca to overcome a heroin addiction, you're trading one drug abuse for another," and it's like, no, that's not how it works at all. Because
Hmm.
something like heroin or alcohol, I mean, people tend to do those. People who are addicted tend to do those on a daily basis, and it destroys their lives, and it's completely out of control for them. This is something you can do one time in a therapeutic session, and then the unhealthy addiction can be gone forever, or maybe you need like a yearly revisit to it or something. But and
Right.
there's also no evidence that these psychedelics, at least not the traditional psychedelics, cause any kind of lasting brain damage or I mean, there's a lot of myths out there, things like flashbacks and uh, you know storing in your spine, and it can cause you to go crazy. Or if you crack your back, you'll start tripping again. A lot of those are just propaganda, like reefer madness type of propaganda, basically. So,
Yeah. I was going to ask about that. Like, is there bad advice that's out there that, you want to warn people about? Because I would imagine if there's something that is this powerful, that there are people out there who are trying to discredit it, or a lot of, so-called scientists who are trying to push it down, right? And use other things and other forms of chemicals which aren't so natural, right?
oh yeah, well, there's tons of people still who are very against it. Who most of them have probably never tried it themselves. Um, they have a complete misunderstanding of about what it is. They're used to, I mean, they were taught that it's just another drug, so
Right.
I mean, they'll see it as being lumped into the same category as heroin, crack, and meth, and I mean, and it really couldn't be more opposite than those things. Um,
Yeah.
so there are people who give bad advice about it just from
Well, what
ignorance.
makes it different between those things? Like, just to clarify for people.
Well, most of those drugs you hear about, they're very destructive. I mean, they can be destructive and addictive from the first time you try them. Um, things like crystal meth or heroin. I mean, most people who get into those things, their lives get destroyed pretty quickly. Or if they're able to turn themselves around, it's not easy to do it at all. But
So you're
um,
saying like this has opposite effects, basically. Instead of destroying people's lives, it can technically uplift them,
yeah, I mean,
extend their
I guess there could be a way this could destroy someone's life if they used it irresponsibly.
right.
Like if somebody took a really high, like a way higher dosage than they ever should have, and they did it at a party around, or walked through some kind of dangerous neighborhood or something while they were under the influence. Like if somebody had a really traumatizing enough experience from it, and then they didn't process that experience right, I mean,
Yeah.
it could cause a post-traumatic stress disorder, just like any traumatic experience could, like being in a war or anything like that. So when you hear about flashbacks, it's not that the chemical is still in you and getting activated again. It's that it's kind of like when people have war flashbacks or something, like any kind of traumatic experience
Hmm.
can pop up from some kind of trigger like that. And you can have a pretty traumatic experience from these chemicals if you're not prepared for it. If you don't do your research first, if you take more at a time than you're ready for, or you're not in the right setting when you do it. But yeah, these definitely don't belong in the category of all those destructive drugs you hear about. It's
So
hard to
is
even call them drugs, actually.
So is LSD a lot like DMT in the same way it has effects, or is it different? Do they come from same sources?
They're all a little bit different in experience. They all have certain things in common, like they all expand consciousness. So you know how on a radio there's a dial with tons of different frequencies you can tune into. My
Right.
theory is kind of that the universe has tons of dimensions, and so do we within ourselves. And I think each of these chemicals is like a different key for a different door, basically. Like maybe each one tunes you into a different level of reality. That's the only way I can think of to describe it, because they all have similarities, but they all have differences also. DMT is completely natural, and the closest thing to DMT, other than DMT, is probably psilocybin, which is what's in psychedelic mushrooms. Um,
Okay.
it's hard to really describe the differences between these experiences in words, because
Right.
it's hard to describe the experience in words at all, really. You can read people's testimonies all day long and get a pretty good idea of what these things do, but the only way to really understand what the experience is to experience it yourself. It
Right.
would be kind of like trying to describe the difference between red and orange to someone who was born blind.
Hmm.
Um, but you can describe it to a degree, but they're not going to get the full picture of what it's like just by reading or hearing about it. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I would imagine there's some difficulty around this topic just because of all the many different things out there. But um, DMT, you said, is like the most natural. So LSD, is it found all over nature as well?
No, LSD was synthesized in a laboratory by
Okay.
Albert Hoffman, but it was somewhat derived from the ergo fungus. The chemical in ergo fungus was LSA. I'm not a
Mm.
chemist, so I don't know the exact differences, but
Right.
I think LSD is basically like an analog of LSA. LSA is also found in morning glory seeds,
Okay.
and Hawaiian baby wood rose seeds, but people who have experienced both usually say that LSD is a much cleaner and more pleasant experience. And something else I wanted to say about it is, um, in the in the truth seeking community, how you see a lot of times like infighting going on, like people arguing about different topics, and that's because that the truth movement is very contaminated also with half truths, or outright deceptions by government agents or people in power who are targeting people in the truth movement and giving what sounds like true conspiracies or true conspiracy theories or whatever, but they're actually false, to kind of poison the whole movement, control people, get people in the movement to argue. And
Right.
one of those things you'll hear a lot of times when you talk about this is like, oh, LSD was created by the CIA as a mind control weapon. Um, and that's sort of one of those half truth things, because they didn't create it, but they tried to use it as a mind control weapon. They were doing experiments on American civilians, like giving them ridiculously high dosages to see how they would react, and they were also doing some pretty cruel experiments on people in laboratory settings using it, trying
Mm.
to use it to brainwash people or um, program them, and it didn't really work for that. When they gave people these crazy dosages of it, it kind of just messed them up. It didn't do what they were looking for. So that
Right.
was in the laboratory setting, but then their hope with giving it out to the public in mass amounts was that they would kind of be able to put the public under a spell and put them under mind control, and actually ended up doing the exact opposite of what they wanted. They all these hundreds of thousands of young people started taking it, and instead of becoming more brainwashed and programs, they broke out of their programming and started seeing just how corrupt and deceptive the system has always been. I mean, that's where all the Vietnam War protests started from, because people were saying like, "Hey, wait a minute! Like, what if our government isn't telling us the truth about what we're doing over there? And what if we really are just over there harming and killing innocent people for the greed of some psychopaths in power who don't even have our own interests at heart.
Yeah. And
Because it,
I don't think it's a coincidence you say they're a psychopath and we're talking about psychedelics, and we're talking about how there's people, a mass amount of people who suffer from all sorts of mental problems. It
yeah.
seems to me like there's a connection being built.
Well,
Like not between the psychedelics causing the psychopaths. I'm saying the psychedelics being able to help a lot of what's going on, the mental problems.
oh, for sure. Well, I mean, I think some of the people who are in so-called power, I say so-called power because it's really an illusion. Like these people who consider themselves are world rulers, or most of us consider them the world rulers. They don't really have more power than we do. It's our belief and their belief in
Mm.
their position of power that gives it any real power. So
Well,
we're really just handing our power over to them on a mass scale. And I think if more people started expanding their consciousness, less of us would be doing that, because we would realize like this power structure is an illusion. It is a lie. Like these people who say they're our rulers, they're not any different than us, really. They don't have any more right to rule the rest of us than any of us do. There's
mm,
nothing godlike about them that puts them in that position. So
right.
why are we doing what they say and listening to them? Why aren't we just tapping into our own conscience for ourselves, or following our hearts, or you know
Yeah. Yeah, and I wouldn't actually be surprised if some people in power were taking these substances just to see some things that they can use against others and prevent them from taking those substances, right? So I'm sure there's cases and exceptions here and there, and there's always going to be people everywhere who are taking this stuff. And the question is how much of the public knows about it, and I don't think a lot people know about it. I don't even know about it, right? So that's my question as well. Like, so what about people like myself, somebody who, like, I, can sit down, I can contemplate, or I can meditate, or I can think and reflect about the world. Do I need these substances, or is it more so for the person who is really rigid in their belief system and they can't escape things, and they're really set on their worldview, um, and they say, no, that's wrong. We're not enslaved, or it
yeah. Well, those are the people who need it the most, I would say. But I really think anyone, no matter what point they're at on their journey, could benefit from it if they use it correctly.
mm,
I think like however far along you are, there's always further to go. So I don't. I think no matter, even if you're like the oldest soul out there, the most enlightened, like you still could take another trip on this stuff and walk away from it with even more understanding and clarity. And
mm,
that's another thing too. If I could sum it up in one sentence, what these things have the potential to do is it increases clarity, and I think that's really key for everyone, because um, one of the things Mark Passio actually talked about in his natural law seminar and several of his talks is how ignorance is at. People say money is the root of all evil, but he says ignorance is the root of all evil, and I think that's a
yeah,
really good point, because I mean, if we could really see how our actions affects the world at large, and how they come back and affect us also, and how deeply everything interconnects, we wouldn't be able to bring ourselves to do some of the things we do. Um, it's because we're desensitized and closed off that we would even do evil things at all. If you were truly, in full knowledge and awareness of our true nature, the world's true nature, how connected everything and everyone is. I mean, I feel like that's where conscience comes from and morality comes from, is awareness of the big picture. Um,
yeah, for
so
sure.
I do think it all comes back to state of consciousness, and I don't think there's a better tool than this for at least introducing people to the fact that higher consciousness exists. And uh, and then, I mean, I do also encourage people to go on a journey of things like yoga and meditation, and if they want to achieve these higher levels of consciousness long term, that's more practical than just like eating mushrooms every day or something like that, because well, they don't work if you do them every day, but also um, Well, yeah, I think they're kind of built that way. It's like
Yeah.
I've kind of thought of it like this before. Like each trip you take, it might have certain lessons to teach you that time, but then you're supposed to integrate those lessons into your personal life. So like you might take a mushroom trip and it'll show you like, oh, this is what you need to fix in your life next, or this is the next thing you need to understand. But then you're supposed to go and apply those lessons. A lot of people will just keep returning to these compounds over and over without really applying the lessons in their life, and that would be kind of like if you if you were studying a musical instrument, you went to a teacher for a lesson, they showed you some things, and then you didn't go home and practice it and learn it. You just kept going back for more and more lessons, but never actually working on what they taught you. Eventually, the teacher would get frustrated or just stop teaching you altogether. I feel like that's how these compounds work because I think they have a consciousness of their own.
Hmm. Yeah, and you have a quote here by Terence McKenna, who, if
Yep.
anybody is not familiar with Terence McKenna, I recommend they look into him. I mean, a lot of his talks and a lot of what he's done is fantastic. And there's many others like him, right? He's only one person, but he has a lot of good stuff that I recommend people check out. You have a quote that you provided for us. Do you mind if I read it?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, so psychedelics are illegal not because a loving government is concerned that you may jump out of a third-story window. Psychedelics are illegal because they dissolve opinion structures and culturally laid down models of behavior and information processing. They open you up to the possibility that everything you know is wrong. So that sort of goes back to the idea you mentioned about how ignorance is the root of all evil, as Socrates said, as Plato said, as most philosophers have said, Buddha, all these cultures have talked about. No surprise, right? And of course, they
Yeah.
may have influence on these chemicals as well. Uh, wouldn't be surprised, but it's just, yeah, it's amazing. So that's really cool. Do you have anything to say about that quote?
Well, yeah, because he talks about dissolving opinion structures, culturally laid down models of behavior, information processing. That can apply to like any level of societal of the control system, whether it's education, media, religion. And religion's an especially big one because I think deep down we all know there's something more out there. We all know there's more to ourselves than just this flesh and blood body and this lifetime on earth. I think we all know that and we're all seeking something more.
Yeah.
And religion, or at least the the big time religions as we know them to be today, they're really used as a control mechanism because the people controlling them know um, that everyone is seeking something bigger than themselves. Um, so they try to fill that void with something false that'll give people the illusion of spiritual truth, but there's always, and there might be some truth in it, but there's always lies mixed in as well. Um, I would say psychedelics are something that can um, just open you up to divine truth directly if you're ready for that kind of experience and you do it in the right setting, of course. But it's interesting because like in the Bible, for example, they actually, it kind of gives the opposite of impression of ignorance is the root of all evil, because in the Genesis story it's actually condemning knowledge in a sense. The supposed God of the Old Testament tells Adam and Eve not to eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge or they'll die. So that's basically sending the message that you're better off being ignorant. um, and I mean, I know that's very controversial, especially to somebody who's a devout Christian, or somebody who's always believed like the Bible is the truth and you don't question it. This is God's word, or that they would say, "Oh, He forbid the fruit from us because it's for our own good to protect us." But how can knowledge itself ever be a bad thing? It's what we do with the knowledge that matters. And a lot of people believe that the forbidden fruit talked about in the Garden of Eden was actually something like mushrooms or ayahuasca.
Mm.
And because if we took it, we would be reminded of our powerful divine nature and how we're connected with everything. And and we do have access to universal knowledge. And as far as what this God of the Old Testament really was, there's different opinions on that. Some people think it's just a made up fictional character by people who wanted to dominate society. Some people think it might actually have been an ET of some kind, like the Anunnaki. There's a lot of stories about, beings who came here hundreds of thousands of years ago, basically to take over mankind, and how they genetically downgraded us so that we would be in a lower state of consciousness and they could control us. And there are a lot of parallels between, if you read about the Sumerian Anunnaki and then you look at the gods of these old religions and how they say, 1 minute they'll say like, oh, like I'm the Lord, I'm all loving and all merciful, but then look how controlling and demeaning and even bloodthirsty and murderous they can be also.
Right.
So I don't think religion gives people an accurate picture of what divinity and the universe is really all about. I think it gives a lot of half truths, and that it's
Yeah.
meant to keep people from seeing the real truth. I think if people started taking these psychedelics in a spiritual context, the religious institutions would probably dry up, actually, and we do see that happening slowly. Like church attendance is lower than ever, and I've heard, and even though it still seems like a lot of people out there are really asleep, the vast majority of them are. There are still more people waking up than ever before, I would say, whether it's to religion or trusting government. Like even the number of people questioning the whole corona psyop, um, that's gone up since it started. Like there's less and less people trusting vaccines or trusting anything we're being told, and I think that's a good sign. Um, I
Yeah.
think it's the kind of process that these compounds could speed up in society, and I think we do need it sped up from where we see it right now, because things are really escalating. And even though you could say people are waking up, it's not at a fast enough rate for the rate that the controllers are really clamping down on us either. It needs to be sped up more. And I
Yeah.
think it could be kind of like an emergency reset button. You hear about the Great Reset thing they're pushing, the World Economic Forum. Well, that's definitely not a great reset. That's just a new stage of global control. I would say the real true great reset would be everybody pressing reset on their own consciousness, like Control Alt Delete, and just stepping back and like refreshing their view on the most fundamental things. Who am I? What is this world? What are we supposed to be doing here? What is right and wrong?
Yeah.
Where do we come from? Where are we going? And Terence McKenna is someone I'd recommend listening to a lot of for those kinds of philosophies, and also Ram Dass. He's another one who I discovered early on in my journey and has inspired me a lot too. I
Right.
have one quote from him too, if there's time to look at it quick before we close out.
Yeah, I want to look at it now. But before we get into that, I just want to mention, like, you made some really good points. In fact, there's a reason why atheism is growing, because people are realizing how bad religion is. Now, that's not to say we're atheists, right? We're talking about spirituality.
Yeah,
Spirituality is not religious or atheist, and I think when you fall into either one, you're still being constricted, your worldview, right? I mean, you're not
yeah,
able to see this greater, bigger picture, why everything exists,
yeah,
why everything's here for a reason or a purpose, like you mentioned before. And the deists, even Taoists, are talking about that now. I mean, questioning all authority and questioning the religions and the institutions, and having to be reliant on books and having to be reliant on their buildings. That being said, I think the materials can come of great use, like the material, whether it's a physical thing like the psychedelics, or this summit, right, where I'm inviting you as a speaker and many other speakers, and we have resources and we have brochures and all this other stuff. We can use the physical world to our benefit. If some people might even be able to get money, that was stolen from them back, and there's people who are finding out all this stuff, and that could all be toward the freedom that we want. We can use the material to our benefit for the
yeah.
spiritual, but I think that still has to rely on the spiritual root, right?
Yeah, you need the whole picture. Like you can go to either opposite extreme. Like there's the atheists who think only the material exists, everything is meaningless, we're just here for a lifetime on Earth, and then we die, and that's it. We don't continue on after that. Morality is a man-made concept, all that stuff. There's no divinity. And then the opposite extreme, you see it a lot in what you might call the New Age movement, where it's like nothing in the material world matters, everything's an illusion, everything's subjective, the truth is relative, your truth is different than my truth. It doesn't matter what you do here in the material because this is an illusion and it's going to pass anyway. Those are both really imbalanced ways of thinking. And it's like the people at the top of this control structure, I think they want us in one extreme or the other. It's kind of like Republican and Democrat in politics, because if they can set up these two sides that look like opposites, people will tend to think if one's false, then the other's true. That's one of their biggest ways of controlling us, is that false dialectic where it's like people aren't realizing there's a third way that's often a completely different direction than any of the choices we've been handed. And yeah, true spirituality, I would say, does incorporate the physical world because it's all part of reality.
Right.
I mean, spirituality is about consciousness and connection to whatever you consider divine source to be, and then the material world is where we apply our understanding. It's where everything plays out, and we see the reflections of ourselves in each other. So it all plays a part. You can't denounce the material for the spiritual, or the other way around either.
Yeah, and I think this perfectly ties in with this quote that we want to talk about, because it's talking about sort of the divisions that are created in the world. Do you want me to read it?
Sure.
Yeah, so Ram Dass, right, is his name.
Yep.
And this is a quote from Ram Dass. It says, "In our culture, we've been trained for individual differences to stand out. So you look at each person and your immediate thought is brighter, dumber, older, younger, richer, poorer. And we make all these dimensional distinctions, put them into categories, and treat them that way. And because of this, we get so that we only see others as separate from ourselves in the ways in which they are separate. One of the dramatic characteristics of the psychedelic experience is being with another person and suddenly seeing the ways in which they are like you, not different from you, and experiencing the fact that we are indeed brothers in in the true sense, that which essence in you and that which essence in me are indeed one." So saying that instead of making like divisions, we can see that there's something greater, higher, more connected, right?
Yeah, because he's talking about the difference between seeing everything as completely separated and fragmented, or recognizing there's one thread that connects it all.
Right.
And I think that is because when you're in the belief that everything is material, I mean, the material realm kind of gives the illusion that everything is separate. You don't see the connection between everything, but the connection between everything is on an energetic and spiritual level. So when you're open to that level, then you do see the connection between everything, and you realize my actions don't just affect me, they ripple out and affect everything, and then ultimately come back to me too. And I mean, whatever we do to others, we're kind of doing to ourselves also, because we are all part of the same system. It's like, I think of it as like cells in a body. Like each one of us, our bodies is made up of trillions of cells, and it's a good thing that they're all working together in harmony. And when they don't work together in harmony, that's what we'd call cancer or any other kind of disease. So if you look at society in the same way, like each one of us is a cell in something even larger than ourselves. Um, I mean, all the dysfunction we see in society is almost like cancer on a larger scale, because the cells are fighting each other instead of working together for the good of the whole thing. And I think it's important to recognize that we are all part of a larger system, but that doesn't mean in a political sense, like through communism or something. See, something like communism, that's like a counterfeit of the real truth that we're all part of something greater, and in the
Right.
greater good. They're giving an illusion of that, saying like, do what we say because that's for the greater good, or you're all going to have the same amount of money because we're controlling it that way, and we're going to control all the resources and basically try to impose equality through control by a special class of people, and that's not equality because they're still the ones calling the shots. So a lot of people make that mistake too. Like if you start talking about this concept of oneness and how we're all connected, and how we have to think of the greater good, they'll jump to the extreme of, oh, you're a communist, because they're only looking at it through like a political lens. They're not. I think if they had this experience of actual consciousness expansion, they would realize the difference. And what he's talking about here is really just like, what's good for the greater good is really what's good for all of us. There's another quote too by I didn't include it in the slides, kind of a controversial figure, but Aleister Crowley.
Right.
He had said, I forget the exact wordings, but like, if each individual was doing their true will, then everything would be in harmony. Like it was to that effect. I don't remember the exact words, but that's basically what he was saying. Was if everybody just instinctively knew their part, what their part in the cosmic play is, and were doing it instead of going against it, then everything would be as it should be because we're each a puzzle piece, basically. But it would be like if, like our red blood cells have a job, or white blood cells have a job. Like all the different types of cells in our body have a job. If they all started doing things that they're not supposed to do, then you'd have chaos. And when most people hear something like what we're supposed to do, they think that means what government tells us we're supposed to do, or what religion tells us we're supposed to do, and those are fakes and counterfeits. What I'm talking about is like what we're supposed to do according to divine plan, which you're not going to find out what that is through a book or an institution or a government or a church. That's only by going within, by quieting your mind and breaking out of the programming and just like listening inwards to that higher part of yourself that is connected to everything. And then that's where the clarity comes from of what our place is and how we should act. I think all the problems in society boil down to people not having clarity, people being in ignorance. And I think what we need is clarity and knowledge.
I agree. Yeah. So here's your slide about resources. I want everybody to look at this because this has everything that people would need to know, right? To basically do their own research. It's a starting point, right? I'm sure there's a
Yeah.
lot more than this. It
Oh,
says
there's a lot
useful.
more than that out there, yeah. But this is a good starting point.
It says useful resources for learning about the science, the philosophy, and the use of psychedelic compounds. So thank you for providing that for people so they can do their own research and make up their own minds, right? Because we're not telling people what to do. We're not the government. We're here sharing knowledge, which is what humans should be doing, educating each other if they think something is important, not forcing it through the gun or the barrel, but sharing it out of just goodwill, more obligation.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming that a lot of this stuff, right, and a lot of these resources you've looked into yourself,
Yeah.
um, there's this belief system. We're at about an hour or so I figured I can ask you one last question if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
So there's this belief system that you are aware of, and I am aware of, and a lot of others on the summit are, but a lot of people in the world don't know about. It's this belief system that takes place in the mind called statism, the belief that there's this authority that exists in some other human being, that they have some more rights than you, that they can do things that if you were to do, it's totally seen differently. And so how did you break out of this mentality? I call it mental slavery, and I even call myself an abolitionist, to kind of fit with the theme here. But how long were you a statist, and how did you break out of that? And did you use a lot of these resources?
Well, I was never quite as much of what you might call a statist as the average person is. Like even in kindergarten, I was the kid where if the whole class was told to walk in a straight line down the hallway, I'd be off to the side, like spinning down the hallway, or like I would do the opposite just for the sake of doing the opposite. But I always looked at things as like I never agreed with the idea that just because something is the rule that you should follow it. Instead, you should ask yourself, like, does this rule make sense? Why are they asking us to do this or whatever? But as far as the part psychedelics plays in that, I think, well, like you said, statism is the belief in authority being in man. Like, a man or a group of men outside of ourselves has authority over us. Um, I think the thing is, we all instinctively know there is a higher authority in the universe, but something like government or a religious institution, those are counterfeits that they give us to pretends to be that. Um, the real authority isn't the government or the church; it's the creator itself. I hate to use the word God or even the word source or any, because you can't really put a label on it. But I'll say the divine. Um, the source of all existence. Basically, there is objective morality. I would also suggest highly that everyone checks out Mark Passio's Natural Law Seminar, and also Corey, who's interviewing me right now, has a lot of great videos on his YouTube channel talking about natural law and morality. Because the thing is, there is, morality and natural law aren't relative or subjective. It is objective. And we all know at some level what right and wrong is, because we have a conscience, we have a connection to that divine source. But if we're not aware of that connection and we're told at an early age, your authority is the government, your authority is the media, your authority is the school, your authority is the church, then we'll end up following that instead of what the true authority is, which I would say is the creator, whatever you want to call that.
Yeah. It
And,
makes sense that there's substances that come from it too.
and
That would help.
the word entheogen is another word for, I mean, it's the same thing as psychedelics.
Okay.
Entheogens would be like mushrooms, DMT, ayahuasca. The word entheogens, it has theos in it,
Mm.
which does mean of the divine. And the word entheogens actually means generating the divine within. So I do think that's what their place is. Because when we're in the material world, we do have the ability to fall away from truth. And I think these things are here almost like like as a life vest or a lifeboat that we can grab onto and be pulled back into alignment when we get out of alignment. I think that's what their place is. So
Yeah.
the people who want to control us, they don't want us connected to that. They don't want us connected to our divine knowing and our divine nature, because then we would never allow ourselves to be controlled by them. We would, if they asked us to do something that was immoral, destructive to ourselves or to others around us, like, going off and fighting in a war that we have no interest in, we would say, well, no, that's wrong. I'm not going to do that. So they don't want us connected to our real natural conscience and divine knowing.
Yeah.
Because the less we are, then the more they can play that role and tell us what to do.
Mm.
But I do think the spell is breaking little by little. I think part of it is because more people have started using these compounds, and maybe part of it is also that people are just, you can only keep this act going for so long before people start, like, have to acknowledge there's something not right with the system. Like the whole COVID thing for 2 years, that was such an extreme um, version of statism. Like, it took things to such an extreme where I think a lot of people who didn't see it before all of a sudden saw it, like, whoa, wait a minute, like, now our lives are being controlled right down to like where we can go and who we can talk to and just every little detail. And that, I think that made a lot of people step back and question everything too. And I do think there is a larger um, force of good at work in the universe, probably the creator itself, trying to guide us in the direction of evolution and clarity. And I think that higher intelligence that we're all a part of is probably orchestrating things in a way where we are pushed towards higher understanding, but we also still have to be open to receiving that understanding.
Yeah.
And I think that's what these compounds are about, opening us to that.
Thank you so much, man, for sharing all this information. I
Yeah.
absolutely appreciate it. Um, I think a lot of people can potentially benefit off of this, especially if they are suffering from different medical ailments as well. I mean, something to
Yep.
definitely take a look into for yourself, right? Of course, make sure to, do your research and all of that. That's why you provide resources. Is there anything else that you want to mention before we close off?
So on this resources slide, I tried to give a few different types. Like some of it's from a science perspective, telling you like because there's people who prefer to know the scientific laboratory um, perspective on something before they dive into it, which is definitely understandable. So some of it's from that perspective, some of it's just people's own experiences with it, some of it's from a spiritual perspective. So I think it's good to check out the full range of these perspectives on it. Um, and yeah, definitely do your own research pretty well before you dive in because you know it can be like diving into deep waters without knowing how to swim if you don't prepare yourself first. You know,
Yeah.
I wouldn't do it at a time when there's tons on your mind or you have work the next day or anything like that. Pick a day and a time with no responsibilities that day, as little on your mind as possible, a quiet, peaceful environment, maybe out in nature. Um, yeah, I would start with these resources here on the slide.
All right. Thank you, man, for joining me. I appreciate the conversation. I mean, really good stuff. I think it's definitely unique, and a lot of other speakers haven't talked about this, in detail. But it is something that I know a lot of people have used in this community and other communities, and trying to attain freedom, and it helps them, especially when they were in their darkest corners and they had, they didn't know where to look. So this can potentially help a lot of people. Thank you, man, for sharing everything. Aaron Nebbia, thank you.
Yeah. And thank you for having me.
Do you have
I
any
don't
links or resources, people where they can like find your work if they want to contact you or anything?
so. As far as an official website, I'm working on that right now.
Okay.
It should be coming soon. I'm actually kind of new to putting this information out there myself, so but at this point, I have an Instagram page and a YouTube page. Third Eye Perspective 1111. If you type that in on YouTube, it's all separate words. Third Eye Perspective 1111. Or on Instagram, it's at Third Eye Perspective 1111. And I have some stuff on there about entheogens and some about other topics as well.
Awesome. Thank you,
Um,
man.
yeah, and I don't think any meetings or anything like this happens by coincidence. I think this was a great opportunity for because I've been wanting to put this information out there in the right context where it reached the right people, and um, yeah, I think this was perfect for that. So yeah, thank you for having me.
I appreciate it. And if anybody wants to get these resources and hear a lot more speakers like this and a lot of things in general, go to nita.one/summit, nita.one/summit. This is the end of Slavery Summit. Thank you very much for watching. Take care.